now for Inside Utah Politics with Lindsay Aerts.
Well, welcome on into IUP Plus today. We're glad you found us, whether it is on News for Utah Plus, on your streaming app, or your streaming TV, or it's on YouTube. We are glad you're here, or maybe you're just listening to this in podcast version. Whichever platform you prefer, we're happy you're here. I want to introduce my panelists today, Taylor Morgan and Rusty Cannon. Hi, guys.
Hello.
It is good to be with you. Tell us who you are, what you do.
I'm Rusty Cannon. I am not cool enough to be invited to teach Taylor Morgan's class at Weber State.
I found that out yesterday.
True. I found out who has been invited, and I have not been one of them, and I someday hope to be cool enough to be invited.
Rusty, would you like to teach on November 4th?
I can't.
Okay.
Okay, so don't
now you
complain.
can't complain about it.
Well, there's another date I can, but we'll cover this later.
All right, how about you guys bro this out offline, all right? Taylor, who are you? What do you do?
I'm a partner at Morgan May Public Affairs and also a instructor at Weber State University, at least for now, until they fire me.
I love that for you. I have been a guest speaker. Rusty Cannon has not been.
He will
I'm
be.
just putting that out
He
there.
will be, yeah.
Not at
AKA
that level
Roost.
yet.
How you doing, Roost?
I'm doing good. Still my nickname.
Good.
Still
I love that for
Yep.
you. Producer Peter, hi, how are you?
Hi, everybody. I'm doing great.
It is good to see you today.
I held everybody up to go get my coffee, so I have my fresh drink.
You
I'm
know
getting
what?
ready to go on vacation. It's a great day.
We all need caffeine. I get it. All right, let's dive in, shall we? Okay, if you are keeping score at home, this is the fourth amended complaint from the lawyers in Utah's redistricting case. So as we speak today, we just learned that there is a new case, a new lawsuit, a new amendment to their current lawsuit in Utah's redistricting case. And this one is trying to block Utah's GOP from running their initiative. It's called an indirect initiative that asks a question, if they get enough signatures, just to the legislature. And so there is a lot of weediness with this lawsuit, but the long and short of it is the plaintiffs argue that the Constitution protects initiatives, and when they say initiatives, they mean voter-approved initiatives, not initiatives that go to the legislature. Taylor, how do you feel about this?
Oh, my goodness. Speaking of caffeine, if you are driving and at all drowsy, I would just turn this off right now. This is so technical and so weedy. I'll tell you what, I'm not an attorney. I play one on TV. I wish I were one because I would be making bank in Utah right now.
Right.
This is really complicated. The Utah Constitution guarantees the right of initiative, the right to petition the government to reform the government via initiative.
And the Utah Supreme Court upheld that last July.
Well, not did they just uphold it, Lindsay, but they made it clear that the Utah legislature cannot tamper or go too far with altering citizen initiatives when those initiatives reform the government. They didn't define reform the government, so there's still a lot of murkiness here around these terms. The real question here is this. Does the Utah Constitution protect direct initiatives over indirect initiatives? What the Utah Republican Party filed yesterday, or the day before, Monday?
Yeah,
what day
Tuesday.
is it?
Yeah.
Okay. What the Utah Republican Party filed, an indirect initiative, is that also protected in the Utah Constitution the same way direct initiatives are? I think that's fundamentally what the new litigation is about. It's questionable. You know, I've dug through the Utah Constitution in this section, and at least for me, I don't think it's completely clear.
Rusty, what do you think?
Well, it's just kind of ironic that, they're suing again to say, hey, it seems we want to use these tools, but you can't. I mean, it seems a little bit on this. I know that's a very top level view of it, but it gets to a point where how much of this are we going to endure? I'm not quite sure. I think the GOP is saying, okay, this is a tool that clearly is a useful tool according to the Utah Supreme Court. We're going to use it. I don't see any problem with it. I think it's a good strategy. Take it to the voters and let's see if we can get whatever it is we want overturned.
But they're not taking it to the voters. They're taking it to 70,000 signatures in Utah's 1.9 million
voters. Well,
active
voters.
registered voters.
And voters of all parties, mind you.
And then they're asking the legislature if they want to repeal Prop 4. They have the votes to repeal Prop 4.
Yeah, there's two pieces, if I understood it correctly. They're doing one to pull back the map,
Yes,
and
a
one to
referendum.
repeal Prop 4.
Yep.
Right, and so the one that would repeal the map would go to voters in 2026.
Correct.
The one to repeal Prop 4 language would go to the legislature the first day of the session, this coming session.
If they get enough signatures, yes.
Yeah, and they will.
The MAP C referendum goes to the voters in November of 26. However, it would freeze implementation of Map C until then, and that gets really interesting.
Let me read you a quote from the plaintiff's lawsuit. They say that the legislature, backed by 4% of voters,
Hold on, what does that mean, backed by 4% of voters?
Because 4% is the the signature threshold to get that 70,000 to get it to the legislature.
Okay, but these are the plaintiffs for the Prop 4 initiative, Better Boundaries. They passed by 50.32%
Yeah, but
on the
50%
ballot.
is not 4%.
No, but if you look at the turnout in that election, in a midterm election, we're talking, I don't know, maybe what percentage? 20, 30% of all Utah voters voted on that, and then they only passed by half that number? I'm just pointing out it's a little bit, ironic that the plaintiffs here are trying to diminish the indirect initiative process by calling out a percentage. That's just, it's absurd.
That's pretty weak.
The legislature, backed by 4% of voters, cannot accomplish that unconstitutional repeal of Prop 4 via the indirect initiative because that mechanism is a creature of statute with no power to overcome the constitutional right of the people to alter or reform their government through the sole constitutionally established initiative process, a majority vote of the people. So what they're saying is the Constitution protects just the right of initiative of the people to vote on it, not this indirect process to go to the legislature.
And I don't know if that's the case. The statute in the Constitution, the section in the Utah Constitution that they are citing here, it does not specifically define or protect a direct initiative. What it does is it simply requires that anything on the ballot that gets there via initiative must pass by at least 50%. That's all it does, at least in my eyes. Again, not an attorney.
Section 6, Article 6, Section 2, if you want to do some Googling at home.
A and B.
Sections A and B.
Knock yourself out.
I've read through it a handful of times. In my mind, it's talking about the initiative process and the referendum process. So there's two sections.
Yeah.
It's saying there's two ways for voters to change legislation. One, by initiating their own with a majority of voters, or repealing something the legislature passed unless they passed it with a 2/3 vote.
Right. And that section, neither Section A or B, right, in the Utah Constitution specifically define direct initiative or referenda. It does not.
So you're saying it doesn't clarify whether there's one or two paths.
What it does do is it establishes a minimum threshold of passage for a law, whether it's a referendum or an initiative, to go into effect. It clearly makes an exception for a 2/3 vote of the legislature when it comes to initiatives. But it doesn't say, that's only limited to referenda. It doesn't do that at all, and it doesn't define direct or indirect initiative. It simply refers to the right of initiative in general. So it's murky here. I don't think it's cut and dry, and it will be an interesting legal debate.
We are going to need some high courts probably to weigh in here and tell us to interpret the Constitution.
Lawyers are getting paid.
Yeah,
Yes,
this is
they
the Full
are.
Employment Act
So,
type of stuff for lawyers.
Rusty, how does this all end? I mean, my mind is exploding with all the possibilities here just in the next month, okay? Because you've got this lawsuit now that's trying to block the initiative. You got the referendum going on. You've got a court battle where we're still waiting to see if Map C violates Prop 4 or not. What map do we use in 2026? How does this all get settled?
I think, unfortunately, I don't think it gets settled soon. If you look as an example, there's other news today or in recent days about Louisiana. There was an argument at the Supreme Court, I think it was yesterday, over a district there where they're talking about race. And if you look at the district they're talking about is literally a snake running all the way through their state, almost of the way through their state, that's majority black voters, and that was challenged. And so the Supreme Court is taking up that whole issue, whether it's race in gerrymandering. There's these types of arguments going on nationally all the way up to the Supreme Court. These have been going on for years, just like we've been doing this since, 2018, this current battle. I hate to be a downer. I don't think this ends anytime soon. I think it gets even muddier from here. But this gets to the point of where I think this direct democracy idea doesn't work, meaning the initiative stuff back and forth, what our Supreme Court set us up for in Utah with this Amendment D ruling roughly a year ago, we're going to have more of this.
Okay,
it's just going to get worse and worse.
I just want to push back a little bit because you're complaining about direct democracy, but the reason it's so messy right now is because the Utah legislature and the GOP has done a ton of stuff to try to reverse the decision of Prop 4.
Well, but that's to get it back to a representative government in a general sense, right? Of going away from this direct democracy of super initiatives. Like, if I get your point, they're rightfully trying to bring it back to just basic constitutional issues of what's really in the Constitution, not leaving it up to judges to interpret it themselves, which is what's happened. And it's created a mess. We're going to become like California, and that's unfortunate.
And unfortunately, as Rusty says, all of this goes back to this fundamental debate initiated by the state Supreme Court last year in July with their ruling saying that the legislature cannot override the will of initiative sponsors. The legislature can alter initiatives, but only where there is a narrow, targeted approach that is justified by a government need to do so.
And it's only with initiatives that reform the government. And what does that mean?
Exactly.
Right?
And so that is the fundamental debate. That's what all of this mess is about. And at least in my opinion, and Rusty may disagree with me, it's unfortunate that the redistricting process, that Map C is a casualty that is just caught up in this mess. Personally, I like Map C. I like having a more competitive congressional district that a really strong, moderate Democratic candidate could win. I don't think that's a terrible thing. I think the legislature did a good job with creating Map C, and unfortunately, it could be a casualty of the mess.
You know, you make a good point. It's kind of the best of the worst with Map C, if that's what we're going to go with. I think that's a bit of a win for Democrats, to be honest with you. Like you mentioned, that District 3, I think it is, and that map is extremely competitive, and that'll be quite the battleground. Kind of take that win and walk away. But on the other hand, it is the GOP trying to reverse it at this point.
Yeah.
But I think that gets back to the principle that they're trying to defend, that this whole idea, this whole mess is backwards, and the ruling from Judge Gibson all the way back to the Amendment D ruling is wrong, and we need to just basically pull all of that back and start from scratch.
Right, but the way to initiate, the way to overturn initiatives in this state would be to change the Constitution, right? We would have to pass a constitutional amendment to say that alter and reform clause in the Constitution, that we don't want that anymore, right? So why aren't we going the constitutional amendment route in terms of making it very clear who has the power, right, to legislate
and
here?
I'm sure legislators carefully considered that. I think that was part of the discussion. We already do have a ballot amendment on November 26th to amend the Utah Constitution to raise this passage threshold, right? It's 50% right now. It would raise that to 60% for initiatives that create a tax or raise a tax. And so the legislature has already gone down that path. I think perhaps, Lindsay, this is more political and more of a poke, perhaps, at the plaintiffs in this case, using their own tactics against them, so to speak, as Chairman Axon mentioned. I mean, I can understand both sides here. It is a hot mess, and there is no resolution in sight, unfortunately.
Yeah, I want to read you the statement that the chairman of the Utah Republican Party sent to me. It is the height of arrogance and hypocrisy for those who once used the courts and the initiative process to push their agenda to now try to deny others that same right.
Amen.
Amen, Rob. I mean, I'm not often going to agree with Rob Axon, but I do right now.
Okay, so let's move to another issue with this whole case, and that is the sponsors of this effort by the GOP to initiate a repeal of Prop 4 and a referendum on Map C.
Yeah.
Rusty, one of those sponsors is Utah's Attorney General Derek Brown. What do you make of that? Is there any conflict of interest there? Is there any problem with him being a sponsor?
I can't think of one. I mean, I think there's 4 or 5 or 6 sponsors that signed it, right? He's one of them.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not an attorney, but I can't think of a conflict. It's very often that attorneys general, is it attorney generals or
Attorneys general.
Attorneys general, thank you, are involved in various things, even if they get a little bit more political. This doesn't surprise me. I think it's perfectly fine. But like I said, I'm not an attorney to know if there would be a
before
conflict.
I lay out a scenario where it could, Taylor, give me your thoughts.
Yeah, I'll disagree with Rusty on this.
How dare you?
Derek Brown is a dear friend. I truly respect Derek. I think he's really doing an incredible job. Derek got to this office by gathering signatures, the first attorney general in Utah history to do so. So he has the broad support of the people. In this case, I just think it's an unforced error, a mistake by Derek Brown, at least politically, at least with public relations. I think, one of the things Derek really campaigned on was not being like Sean Reyes, overtly political and perhaps abusing the office as a political platform. I'm not saying he's doing that, but I'm saying it was unnecessary for him to be a sponsor of this initiative. I don't think he gains anything from it politically, yet I think there is a real risk here of the perception of the public that, hey, if the sponsors of this initiative have to sue the state elections office for some reason, then Derek is a sponsor and he would have to recuse himself. Right? I think that's
But is that a big deal if he goes and recuses himself? It's
not
like, I mean,
legally, perhaps, but the perception is real, right? I think that's a real problem.
It's not a big deal because lawyers recuse themselves all the time. They just conflict screen for everything, right? But it does bring up the question where if there is a scenario where Derek Brown could be a plaintiff and a defendant in a lawsuit, he'd be a plaintiff as the sponsor, right, and defending the LG's office. Again, they're saying they just conflict him out, but
Well, here's the thing.
that is a conflict.
Yes, by saying he would just recuse himself, they are acknowledging that it is indeed a conflict, right? Is that fair?
Rusty, what do you think?
well, yeah, I can see your point. I want to say it's a bit of a mountain out of a molehill. I don't think it really. I mean, there needs to be a certain number of signatures on it, right, Taylor? When they put these things into the LG's office, he's one of them. I don't see what the big deal is. I think technically, maybe there's something where he needs to recuse himself, but I just,
I don't think it's that big of a deal. I see very little to gain.
Yeah.
that's a fair point.
for Derek. Yeah.
An interesting move for sure. Okay, well, just give me your last thoughts on the topic of redistricting. Is there anything we're missing here that the public needs to know? Because I imagine the public isn't caught up.
Can I dive into the weeds and make this
Go.
even less interesting,
Let's
perhaps?
go.
You made a good point, Lindsay, about why isn't the legislature just trying to amend the Constitution directly,
Right.
to put their power to amend initiatives over initiatives in the Constitution? Perhaps by repealing the Prop 4 language, through an indirect initiative, would that completely eliminate the state Supreme Court's ruling from last July because it was based on that language? I don't know. Just, hypothetically.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question either because I'm not a lawyer either. But I think it's still, there's this whole question of whether or not this indirect initiative is even constitutional. And we haven't seen the lieutenant governor come out as of the time we're talking right now and say, yes, this is constitutional, you can put it on the ballot, because the plaintiffs are arguing that they can't do this because the Constitution provides that it's by the voters is the way we initiate laws.
And if this referendum on Map C does freeze the implementation of Map C and Judge Gibson cannot choose it by the November 10th deadline, and Lieutenant Governor Henderson
But
can't
the
implement
deadline for
it.
signatures is after
That's
the
what I'm
deadline
saying.
for the court.
That's what I'm saying. If we can't use Map C because of this referendum, then does Judge Gibson choose another map that is more favorable to the plaintiffs? So where does that put us?
No, but think about this. In this case right now, we are getting so in the weeds here, but here we are.
Yeah, here we are.
Our people
It's
love
too
it.
late.
They know it. We're gone. We're so gone. In this lawsuit, there is a claim that the 2011 map, so this is decades ago, is malapportioned, meaning that it doesn't meet the standards that the federal government or the federal Constitution says we have to have, right? So there's already claim against the 2011 map. And so I think the plaintiffs are arguing here that they just think the judge should pick a new map. But Rusty, I don't even know if that's possible.
I've said this before. What they want is the judge to pick a map that they like. They want the judge to pick the plaintiffs to pick a map that they feel like a Democrat can win. That is absolutely what their whole strategy has been. We've been over this before. They didn't sue about legislative districts or local districts. It was congressional. That's only. This is not about fairness. It's about putting a Democrat in place. And they want the judge to pick their favorite map.
And the money that is funding this lawsuit,
Okay,
the
but
plaintiffs, is coming from out of state.
Who's paying for the signatures for the GOP?
We don't know yet.
Is that an
It
in-state
hasn't been
form or an
reported.
out-of-state form?
We don't know. It hasn't been reported.
I don't think it'll be a very big issue. The problem with these initiatives, and I love talking about this stuff, is that this is exactly how it works. You pick an initiative. It can be an initiative to send artillery into the desert or whatever it is. People are going to sign it. You need a pocketbook to pay for it, people to gather the signatures. They'll just sign it and some clever marketing, and it'll likely pass. It's just that is the problem with these. Whether it's deep money from the left, deep money from the right, that's exactly who funds these things. And it's not in-state grassroots, completely out-of-state interest almost all the time.
On both sides, you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's hypocritical to point at the other side because that's exactly who's funded all the initiatives in Utah before, and that's not going to change.
Yeah, I'm a huge proponent of the citizens' right to initiatives. I have run initiatives in the past here in Utah, and I think we've been very effective in changing policy as an outcome of running initiatives. However, in this instance, we have initiatives run amok, And I think we are getting a real taste of what it would be like to be in California.
So if initiatives aren't cool, what does it mean
I'm not
that
saying
the
they're
people?
not cool.
Okay, that's kind of what you're saying, though. You don't love them as much as just representative
I think
constitutional
use
republic.
should be very limited and as a absolute last resort.
Right. Okay. So if we don't like initiatives or we want to use them as a last resort, what does it mean for the people to be able to alter and reform their government?
It doesn't work. So as an example,
I know, but what does
Okay.
it mean? What does that section of the Constitution provide for then?
So, for example, I think a good example of that is, not to be too biased here and to disclose a conflict of interest, perhaps. I'm the executive director of Count My Vote. We've run 2 initiatives. I would defend what we did via initiative as exactly that, reforming the government, because we changed the process by which our legislature is elected.
Right. But we didn't have this definition when you ran your initiative.
Right. But I would say that is probably the appropriate use of initiatives. And so does the redistricting process fall within that? Arguably, maybe. So it's really difficult, I
Sorry.
think.
Rusty, I cut you off. Go
no,
ahead.
it's totally fine. I was just going to say, as an example, and I talked about this before. Last election, how many of these initiatives, ballot initiatives, were on a California ballot? It was literally about 14 of them. Like,
Okay, but
there's
we're not-
no voter that will understand all of them in detail, or even take the time to read it, or just check the box. It is a terrible way to govern. Ask anybody that works in regulatory or legislative affairs in California, and I know some, that it is an absolute mess that they cannot get out of. That is the road that Utah is going to go down now, unless this decision from the Supreme Court a year ago, we'll call it the Amendment D1, is somehow curtailed. We are going to be like that in a decade. You'll have a dozen of these every ballot initiative because Party A will say something's wrong, Party B will, and they'll get their pocketbooks out and fund something, and we will have 10 of these to vote on.
Okay.
It is a terrible way to run a state.
We're going to leave it there because I want to get to the rivalry before we leave this conversation. If you think we didn't disagree enough today,
Let's talk some football.
let's talk some
Yes.
football and rivalry week. I saw the both the presidents of BYU. Look at these helmets. Thank you to our sports department who lent them
This
to
is
us.
the one here.
Yes. I saw some reporting that I don't want that one. Why do I want that one? I'm going to
picked
show
the
my
wrong
bias on
helmet.
this team, okay? I'll show my bias here. So the presidents of both the universities came out and said, rivalry right, guys. Like, don't be mean to each other. I mean, the game can get the best of us sometimes, right? But be good sports. Is that the message you guys want to send? Or like, who's going to win here? What's the over-under?
Nobody wants misbehavior. Everybody wants to have a good time. People get totally out of hand, from time to time. But man, I am a Ute, and we need this one. We can't have a second conference loss. We need this.
I think
this
we have
win.
3 Utes here,
Score
Taylor.
predictions?
What's the over-under? Yeah.
I'm going Utes 27, BYU 21.
Ooh, I'm saying this decided in something less than 3 points.
Okay.
I think this will be neck and neck. It always is.
Yep.
Last minute, possibly.
And let me guess, the refs are going to overturn so BYU wins at the end. Is that what's going to happen? Because that's happened to us before.
Yeah, let's hope not.
Lindsay got the script early.
Yes, that's exactly what's going to happen.
I tend to think whoever wins this is going on to that second slot in the Big 12 Conference Championships. I think this is for all the marbles.
You're right.
This is
It's
for the
a
marbles.
big deal.
There is more on the line in this game than ever before.
I'm
in the
hearing from a
rivalry
lot
game.
of people that they feel like this year is different. This is always a hot game, but this year is for a lot.
I'm stressed.
I'm already nervous. Yep. Okay, sounds good. Thank you for joining us today. Appreciate you being here. Of course, watch IUP or Inside Utah Politics on ABC4 Sundays at 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. And we will see you next time.
Go Utes.
Thank you.